Welcome back to the Polish Podcast, where we embolden women in their faith and work. I'm your host, Jane Doerman. Your work matters. In a Polish network, we provide the connection you crave, professional development you deserve, and the gospel that you need. Join us each episode as we deep dive the themes we're exploring in the Polish community, featuring a variety of guests, sharing their perspectives and experiences as Christian working women. Whatever brought you here today, we are so thrilled that you decided to join us, and we hope these stories spark a renewed sense of purpose and embolden you to flourish on your leadership journey. If you've been following along this month, you know that we're exploring what it looks like to lead with love. In the book of Matthew, there is a powerful passage that paints a vivid image of the final day of judgment. Jesus, the ultimate king, returns in all his glory. He's seated on his throne. He starts separating humanity like a shepherd distinguishing between sheep and goats. This separation, we read in Matthew 25:40, hinges on our compassion and care for those in need. For the sheep, who demonstrated love by caring for the hungry, the thirsty, the naked, the sick, the stranger, and imprisoned, the king commends them, saying, "When you did it to one of the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you were doing it to me." Now, it's not looking so good for the goats, who ignored the plight of their fellow human beings, and the king utters the chilling words, "Depart from me." Ugh. In a world often consumed by individualism, followers of Jesus are called to embrace a more communal existence, actively noticing and responding to the needs of others. And this extends beyond traditional acts of charity. It encompasses our everyday work. Whether it's food preparation or helping a new colleague or designing and manufacturing goods, our ordinary work becomes a resource that someone out there desperately needs. Leading with love, therefore, entails showing up for others in both grand and ordinary, dare I say, mundane ways. This is why I am so thrilled to introduce our guest to you today, Sarah Thebarge. Sarah wears many hats. She's an author, she's a speaker, she's a journalist, and a nurse based in the San Francisco area. Beyond her local impact, she dedicates herself to international medicine, volunteering in Togo, West Africa, Kenya, and the Dominican Republic. I first crossed paths with Sarah a few years ago when she spoke at our women's conference, and what drew me in was not only her professional pursuits, but her deep commitment to embodying and leading with love in every facet of her life. Her story, as beautifully chronicled in her first book, The Invisible Girls, intertwines her personal journey through breast cancer at the young age of 27 with the profound connection she formed with a Somali refugee family.
What happened was I was living on the East Coast. I went to a physician assistant school. And then I went to journalism school, and I had this whole career plan to become a medical writer. And then I got breast cancer when I was 27 years old, and my whole world and that whole plan fell apart. And I went through surgery and chemo and radiation. I had a recurrence. I ended up septic in the ICU, and I was in the hospital for a month. And I just decided that the pieces of my life there on the East Coast were just too broken to even think about how to put them back together again. And so I had some friends from college who lived in Portland, Oregon, and I decided I was just going to sell everything. I bought a one-way ticket to Portland, and I landed in Portland, bald, broken, bruised, just a mess of a person that I didn't even really recognize. And I started trying to put a new life together in Portland. And during that process, one afternoon, I was riding the MAX, which is the light rail train, towards downtown Portland. And this Somali woman got on the train with her two little girls who were ages 3 and 4. And the train was really crowded, and there wasn't a seat for the 3-year-old. This little girl was really tired. And so she was standing up, but she was nodding off to sleep. And she was starting to fall over. And then just before she hit the ground, she would startle awake. And then she would do it again. And I thought, oh my goodness, that little girl's so tired. Somebody should hold her. And the second that I had that thought, the little girl opened her eyes and she looked right at me. And so I held my arms up like this. And she climbed into my lap and she fell asleep. And then I had the thought, oh my goodness, I need to make eye contact and talk to her mom so that she doesn't think some stranger is trying to abduct her child.
Sure.
So I looked at the mom and I introduced myself, and the mom started telling me in very broken English that she and her girls, she had 5 little girls, they'd come over as refugees from Somalia, and she was here by herself. And when she ran out of English vocabulary to tell me more about what was going on with them, she just started to cry. And she said, it's too much. It's too much. And I recognized the look in that woman's eyes, because I thought, that's how I felt when I just got to Portland and my life fell apart and I was really scared. And so even though, I'd never been to Africa at that point, I didn't know much about Somalia per se, I just thought, I recognized the look in that woman's eyes because I was there too. And so I had this thought that this woman and her girls are not okay. She's really overwhelmed and kind of lost. And so I asked the mom for her address, and she gave me their address. And then at the next stop, they got off the train.
Now, it's one thing to show up for others, but how do we show up when our own personal life feels so broken? This question is one we all wrestle with at one time or another. And what's inspiring about Sarah's story is she chose to show up anyway.
And a couple days later, I was sitting in my car with their address thinking, on the one hand, I need to go check on them because I think they're not okay. And then on the other hand, that's crazy because if I met a stranger on the train and then the next day they showed up at my house knocking on my door, I would freak out. But I just decided, I just want this family to know that there's at least one person in the U.S. that sees them and that cares about them. And so I decided to go. And so I drove over to their house, and I found that they were living in this apartment, and it was completely empty. All they had was one mattress in one of the bedrooms and one blanket. So at nighttime, they would all 6 of them sleep together on the blanket, on the mattress, and share this one blanket. Their house was freezing cold. Nobody told them how to use a thermostat. The only food that they had was moldy bread and a bottle of ketchup. I just had this idea about if I were in their shoes. So if I got dropped in the middle of Somalia with 5 girls and I didn't speak the language and I didn't know anybody and I don't know how anything works in this country, what would I want a stranger to do for me? And the answer is very clear. I'd want them to help.
What would I want a stranger to do for me? I'd want them to help. Sarah's story paints a vivid picture of what it truly means to take that straightforward next right step, which allowed her to uncover the immense joy that follows when we dare to embark on the initial act of simple obedience.
It just became this big adventure. So I came back a couple days later with groceries and some clothes for the little girls. They actually came to my place for Thanksgiving. And then that night we drove them back to their apartment, and a bunch of my friends from church came over, and we did this big house shower. So people brought furniture and a dollhouse and clothes and towels for the bathroom and just everything that they needed to really start to thrive in their life in America, not just survive. And then this became a relationship. I was over spending time with them a couple times a week, and I started blogging about it because I love to write. And my nickname for the blog was the Invisible Girls, because the day that I met them on the train, it seemed like nobody saw them except me. And I blogged about them for a good 1.5 years, probably. And then I started thinking, there's these 5 girls, and I was the first woman in my family to ever go to college, and I know what a big difference that made for me. And I started thinking, not the question, what do you get for the girl who has everything, but what do you get for the girl who has absolutely nothing? And my answer to that question was, you get her an education. And I didn't have enough money to send 5 kids to college myself. That's so expensive. But I thought, I can't write a check and pay for their college, but I can write a book. And so I wrote the book, The Invisible Girls, that weaves my story of surviving breast cancer together with their story of surviving a war zone in Somalia. And then I set up the Invisible Girls Trust Fund, and all of the profits from the book are in that trust fund, paying for these girls to go to college.
What's incredible about our God is how he uses our stories, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and he has the power to transform them, not just for our benefit, but more often than not, if we're aware, he invites us to be catalysts through our work, to be a part of the redemptive work God's doing in the world around us, here, near, and far. Through her relationship with the Invisible Girls, she learned that these 5 sisters had lost 3 brothers in the Somali war zones, which got Sarah thinking.
And, I have a degree in medicine and I had a background in emergency medicine. And I started thinking, what happens to these people who are living in war zones in these really tough places who can't get out? And so I thought, I can go to them. And that inspired me to start taking trips to Africa to teach and practice medicine.
Hang tight. We're taking a brief break to fill you in on fantastic ways to engage with the Polish Network, so don't go anywhere. Polish Network Polished Giving Day is March 8th. That's right, on International Women's Day. Will you help us reach our $15,000 goal? Consider being a matching donor. Your contribution directly impacts spiritual connection, professional growth, and fights isolation for working women. Support our mission and give your gift at polishnetwork.org/give on Polished Giving Day. Let's create a supportive space where women flourish together. Save the date, March 8th, and make a difference with Polished Giving Day. Sarah Thebarge embodies what it looks like to show up for others through her work and embraces a posture of obedience to how God leads her, which eventually led her to teach and practice medicine overseas in Africa.
I spent 3 months working in a hospital in Togo in West Africa, which I didn't know this till I went there, but every 2 years, I think the UN does a survey with different metrics. And the year that I went, the UN ranked Togo the least happy country in the world because of conflict between people groups and economics and the treatment of women and, just all of these metrics added up to make Togo the least happy place in the world. And I went there.
She went there to Togo, the least happy place on earth, one of the most dangerous places on earth for women. And her experiences there led her to write her next book, Well, where she captures her experiences teaching and practicing medicine for 3 months in Togo, highlighting the hardships that she witnessed, which created a deeper understanding and awareness of the greatest needs of the people that she served.
My first week in Togo, I saw more people die than I had seen in 10 years of practicing emergency medicine in the US. It was unbelievable, indescribable amounts of pain and suffering. And most of it's preventable. 6 million kids in the developing world die every year. 6 million. Goodness. So we lose as many kids every year under 5 as Jews in the Holocaust, just to put that number in our minds.
Yeah.
And most of it is completely preventable. So if these kids had medicine, vaccines, clean water, food, nutritious food, we wouldn't lose them.
Sarah also had another opportunity to serve in Kenya, where God revealed to her more obstacles the people faced to get basic, preventable, and crucial medical care they desperately needed, which inspired them to action.
They had started a school on the island for kids who'd lost their parents, who'd been orphaned because their parents died of AIDS. And on the island, if a kid needs to go to the hospital, you have to put them on a moped, get them to the dock. From the dock, they have to take a boat to the mainland. From the mainland, they have to take a 3-hour bus ride. That's the closest hospital. Wow. So what we did was we started a clinic at the school where these kids go to school. And so we taught their teachers how to do basic pediatric first aid and treat basic pediatric infections and treat pediatric, treat injuries, like how do you apply a splint, how do you treat a burn, things like that.
In her most recent project, Sarah obeyed the call to travel to South Sudan, which is one of the most dangerous places she has ever been because it's an active war zone. Yet Sarah saw a need to bring medical education to the people in South Sudan and even helped provide a way to improve medical transportation.
They've had a record amount of flooding in South Sudan. And when it floods, all of these small, like remote villages are washed out. They cannot get out and nobody can get to them because the roads are just gone. And so every village has a school. And so what we did was we brought 100 teachers into the main town and did a 3-day course. Same thing, pediatric first aid and medicine. And then had them pass a proficiency test. And if they passed that and showed that they knew how to use the medications that we were giving them, et cetera, they got a big duffel bag, like a medical kit to take with them. And so when they can't get out to get these kids to medical care, their teacher has a kit that they can use to bring care to these kids. And then most recently when I was there last year, what we did, because the flooding has continued, it's, they haven't seen flooding like this ever because they're right on the bank of the Nile River. And when it rains a lot, the river just overflows. So we did a campaign and we started a water ambulance that goes up and down the Nile River. It takes supplies from, the World Food Program has food. So they get huge bags of like beans and rice that are available to people that live along the Nile, but the people can't get to the town to get them. So we stopped at the boat with all of these supplies. We went on the Nile, drop off the supplies, and then anybody in these places who needs a higher level of medical care than what we can do, just there in a day, we put them on the boat and we bring them back with us to the hospital.
Sarah's passion to serve vulnerable lives is evident through the work that she does. And what you will also learn through her story is she cares for people overseas and she cares for people locally in the work she does at an urgent care in San Francisco, California. You got a lot going on, Sarah. That's so... You're
well,
like,
what could be better? I can't think of any better use of resources or time or energy or anything than, helping people. In the Bible, Jesus calls them the least of these, like the people who are most desperate, most vulnerable. But what could be more important than sharing what we have with them?
And that's what I love about your story. You're a woman of action. You don't just read your Bible, you read it and you put your faith into action every single day. And that's something, we want to encourage the women that connect with the Polish Network that wherever God calls you, you don't have to do it in missions. That's a specific calling, but you are doing it well. Like you are, you're doing it internationally. You're even doing it in your own hometown because, correct me if I'm wrong, you work at an urgent care too when you're here in the States. So, I mean, how does, those are two very different worlds, obviously. So, how do you focus your calling and showing up for others within the world of medicine in the States as well in the work that you do here?
Yeah, so I work at an urgent care here in San Francisco, and it's very different. I mean, San Francisco has a lot of wealth. There's a lot of, it's very disparate. So there's a lot of poverty. There's also a lot of wealth. So San Francisco is often ranked, the most expensive real estate market in the in the country, and then one of the top 10 most expensive real estate markets in the world. So there are people that have a lot of wealth, and some of our patients fall into that category too. But I think beyond labels and beyond material things, at the end of the day, whether you live in South Sudan or San Francisco, you're a human being. And human beings experience pain and suffering and fear. And when any of us feels that way, what we want is somebody who has compassion for us, who understands. When people come to see me, because it's an urgent care, they don't wake up thinking, oh, I'm going to break my leg today. I'm going to prepare for this and have the kids picked up by this person. The world just falls apart at once when you get injured and you wake up and you're horribly sick. So I try to remember, nobody wakes up expecting that they're going to have to see me that day, and to understand what it's like for them to have to come in and get care, and then to understand if I was, I've been sick, right? I had chemo and got horribly sick when I was going through the cancer treatments. And I was not the best version of myself, right? So I had days when I didn't have any patience, when I was so afraid I couldn't even think about anybody else. I couldn't try to be a better version of myself. Like there was no energy to try. And I remember the people that showed up with me. I remember my oncologist and the nurses and the social workers and the people who were just so kind. And that's the kind of energy I want to put into the world. And that's the kind of person I want to be, no matter who the person is in front of me, whether it's a kid with malaria in South Sudan or, a venture capitalist who broke his foot this morning. I mean, it doesn't matter. Yeah. Everybody needs care and compassion and a reflection of grace.
I really love that. And that's it's a sobering reminder of just like our common humanity that we all share, no matter whether it's in the States or overseas or wherever God's placed you. And it's this challenge, right, of how are we going to show up today in the lot that God has given us, and how do we steward that well? And I see that reflected in the story that you're living currently and in the books that you've written. I especially found your book very engaging in the sense of, it highlights the time of you practicing medicine in Togo. Could you give us a little insight into what you focus on in the book and your time there? And just how has that shaped your perspective in the interconnectedness of our health, of community, and our compassionate care?
I think it's really easy for us to get lost in these like news headlines and numbers.
Sure.
So we read about, it's something to read about, 6 million kids in the developing year under 5 die every year. It's another thing to hold a baby in your arms that you tried all night to save because, this really happened. There's an 18-month-old little girl who had malaria. And in little kids, it often becomes cerebral malaria. So the infection goes to their brain and they run really high fevers and they have seizures. And so this little girl was seizing through the night. And every time you have a seizure, you don't breathe. We tried all night. And I just stood there like bagging her every time she'd have a seizure. And we gave her all the medicine we could give her. And in the end, when the morning was coming, she was gone. Her pupils were blown, like she was gone. So it's one thing to read that happens to kids, that they die of malaria, but it's another thing to spend all night trying to save one.
Yeah.
And then to have to wrap her in cloth and hand her to her dad so that he can walk home with his daughter's body and bury her.
Yeah.
And what I try to do in Well is put faces and names and stories to these numbers. And these are our neighbors. These are people who are so loved by God just the same way that each of us is. And when we see the need and we engage in that story and we engage in the pain, I think it propels us to do something about it. In 1 Corinthians 13, like the love chapter, it says, now these three remain, faith, hope, and love, but the greatest of these is love. And it didn't even occur to me, I'm a preacher's daughter. I grew up in the church. I know the Bible. I know the Bible. I know that chapter. But until I was in Togo, it never occurred to me to ask, of these three amazing things, faith is, of course, hope, love, Why is love the greatest? Why does love get ranked the greatest of these three things? And I realized it's because if we have faith, sometimes we define faith as like believing the right doctrines, right? Or faith in terms of like praying that God will do something, God will intervene.
Right.
Then we sit it out, right? So we either think, well, I show up on every Sunday, I show up to prayer meeting every Wednesday, I read my Bible every morning, so I'm doing the right thing, I'm a person of faith. Or we think, well, I'm praying that God's going to feed these people and clothe them and get them medicine somehow. So that's enough. If we have hope, we're waiting for a time in the future when the suffering that we see now isn't happening. So we're waiting till we get to heaven. We're waiting until someone else intervenes and the future looks different than it does in the present.
Mm-hmm.
But it's love that causes us to be in the moment and to look around us and to do the very best next thing that we can do to alleviate suffering, to make the world a healthier, happier place for everyone to live in. And I think, coming to your theme, I think it's love that makes us actually do something about the suffering that we see in the world right here, right now, in whatever capacity we can.
Mm-hmm. So I'm listening to this and I totally agree with you, Sarah. And I'm thinking of the person who's listening right now who's like, okay, this feels a little scary because what if God calls me to, X, Y, Z, and that's a scary thing to call. Can you speak to this fear that we are confronted with when it comes to choosing to love and to show up for others? Like how do we confront that fear, or how do we move forward?
Yes. Here's the best way that I understand it. Martin Luther King Jr. preached a sermon about the story of the Good Samaritan, right? So the story that Jesus tells about the Good Samaritan, there's a man who's beaten up, bleeding, dying by the side of the road.
Yeah.
And the priest walks by, and we would expect, the priest is a man of God, he's a man of the church, he would help. He doesn't help.
Mm-hmm.
And the next person, the Levite, the guy that runs the temple, he walks by. He doesn't help. And then the Samaritan, who was just like an enemy of the Jewish man that's dying by the side of the road, that enemy, the least likely person, he stops and he helps. And he gets the man to medical aid and he pays for the stay. And Martin Luther King Jr. talks about the difference between the priest and the Levite who didn't stop and the Good Samaritan who did. Is the question they were asking. So the priest and the Levite asked the question, if I stop and help this man, what will happen to me? But the Good Samaritan reverses the question and says, if I don't stop and help him, what will happen to him? And I think that is the key to overcoming fear, is that we stop being so self-centered and so self-protective and stop thinking so much about, how crazy will I look if I ask a Somali woman that I've never met for her address? How dumb will I look if I stop and help this person? How risky will it be if I go to that part of town or that part of the world? We stop thinking about what will happen to me and we reverse the question and we start asking, if I don't reach out, if I don't take that risk, what will happen to that person that I don't help?
That is very challenging. And I love that shift in perspective, because I agree, we are very self-centered. Naturally, we are so self-centered.
It's natural.
Like,
absolutely. Yeah.
It's absolutely natural. And I think, people need to hear that. And as followers of Jesus, we are called to put Jesus at the center and to trust him. And that is an act of faith to move forward, because that is love in action, to actually say, okay, God, like to your point, I'm going to ask for this Somali woman's address and show up for her and start asking, like, what would I want someone to do for me? Or reverse it, who would help this family? Yeah. If I don't, and I think that's a sobering reminder for all of us, especially in this idea of showing up for others as we lead with love in our workspaces, in our homes, in our churches, in our communities, wherever we are. That is a really cool shift in perspective for sure. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're putting Sarah in the hot seat for Ask Me Anything, so do not go anywhere. Hey, Polish Network, I am really excited to tell you about a brand new podcast, Holy Curiosity with Kat Armstrong. Kat's the co-founder of Polish Network and a fierce advocate for working women. Kat's mission in life is to spark holy curiosity in Bible readers. That's why the Holy Curiosity podcast follows a person, a place, or a thing in the Bible so that we can all appreciate the genius storytelling of God. Kat, along with Bible scholars and special guests like Drs. Tim Mackey, Lynn Kohik, Michelle Knight, Nijay Gupta, and Diane Langberg, will guide us through storied connections threaded throughout Scripture. And Kat's not afraid to talk about hard topics. For instance, Kat's first miniseries is about the abuse Dinah experiences in Genesis 34. Go subscribe to Kat's new show, Holy Curiosity. You can find more information about Holy Curiosity on Kat's website, katarmstrong.com/podcast. Or you can click the link in our show notes. Check it out today. Well, welcome back, friends, to the Polished Podcast. We hope you are enjoying the conversation that we're having with our guest today, Sarah Thebarge. But now, it's time to add a dash of spontaneity and a sprinkle of fun to the show. It's time for Ask Me Anything! This is a chance for us to peel back the layers and get to know the woman behind the work and the quirks behind the expertise with questions curated by you. So let's follow our curiosity to know more about Sarah. So my first question for you, Sarah, is with it being Black History Month, we want to know if there are any Black historical figures or current influential leaders that have inspired your work and your mission. How have they influenced your perspective?
You know, there are notable figures. So obviously Martin Luther King Jr. in the U.S.
Sure.
Amazing writers. So Toni Morrison is one of my favorite writers who tells the story.
Okay.
Amazing stories about different dynamics, different experiences in the Black community. Mm-hmm. I will say, though, I think the most influential, impactful leaders and that have inspired me are the ones that you would never know their name. They don't make it to the headlines. They don't make it to, they don't publish a book. But when you go into these communities, there are the grandmas that are taking care of all these kids, even some of them who have been orphaned, but they take them in. There are the guys who are helping their neighbors, dig out of mud so that they can get their moped to town to get food. There are people in their community who are actually pitching in, who are actually making big sacrifices in order to help the whole community thrive. And I think that is inspiring. And I think one of the reasons why it's so inspiring to me is because I think we think that the world needs one person with $1 billion to write a check and every problem gets solved and we're done.
Right.
We're like, I'm not Bill Gates, so that's not me, right? I'm not that one person, that one millionaire. But the world is not waiting for one person with $1 billion. The world is waiting for 1 billion people with $1, even 1 cent, to pitch in and make that contribution. And I want to be one of those. And what I see in these communities is that there are 1 billion people with $1, and I want to be one of them. I think that's really inspiring, and that's something I can do. That's something all of us can do. Yeah.
No, that is inspiring, and that is. I often think about times where I get discouraged about what I see around me, or about culture, or about things happening overseas that are out of my control. And it's like, gosh, God, why can't you help us? And it's like, I created you. So what can you do to be a part of the solution? And that's like we were talking about early. It can be a little scary to think about that, but I think when we turn to God and we ask him to say, what's that next right step? Yeah. He shows you that next right step, whether it makes sense or not. Right?
Absolutely. When we think about changing the world, right? We think about a huge canvas and a huge, broad brushstrokes, these massive contributions and the Nobel Peace Prize and all this. But I don't think life is like that. I don't think that that's how the world changes. I think life is like a pointillism painting. So if you go to a museum and you look at a George Seurat painting, when you look at it real close, all you see are these tiny little dots, and they don't make any sense. But then you take a step back and you see it all adds up, all of these little dots add up to make this gorgeous picture. And I think when we look at what we can do, so what skill we have, what financial resources we may have, what availability we may have, it just looks like this tiny little dot, like it's nothing. But then when we take a step back, we realize if all of us just put that one dot that we can do on that picture, we step back and we see that's how the world changes. That's how the world becomes well again. It's just one little dot at a time.
I love that. That is a really good reminder for all of us, just doing that next right step, whatever that looks like in the world that surrounds you, and you are making a greater impact for the kingdom in that regard, because the kingdom is not just limited to us, it's everybody.
It has to be.
It has to be. No, I love it. I love it. On a more lighthearted note, what's the most surprising thing you've learned while practicing medicine in different parts of the world?
Well, I think it's this contrast about how we're all the same. So we all have the same physiology. We all have the same parts. And yet how we understand what's going on is very different and very culturally influenced. And so I had in Togo, I had a woman who had vaginal discharge. And she came in and I asked what the problem was. And through the translator, she said, my uterus started crying and I don't know why.
Oh my goodness.
Beautiful.
That's one way to put it. Yeah.
The understanding of what's going on is really, it's kind of entertaining and funny and really insightful.
Yeah. It kind of puts it's like poetic almost, when you think about it, you're like, oh, yes, we're from different lived experiences, different cultures, and just how bridging that gap through language and how we view the world. That's so interesting.
Yeah.
So what's your go-to comfort food? And is there a story behind why it brings you comfort?
Well, I love to cook, and that is one of my pastimes. I really, really enjoy it. It's really therapeutic to me. So my favorite thing is to make a homemade pot of vegetable soup that simmers all day on the stove, and then you eat it at night with a nice warm piece of bread. And the reason I love it is because it's really nutritious. So the medical person in me loves all of the vitamins. So I love that. And also, to me, the process of chopping all of these vegetables one by one is a process of, it's like meditation. And it makes me thought, I don't have gadgets. I don't use kitchen gadgets. I just have, I don't have a mandolin, or I don't use a food processor to chop things up. I just do it all by hand. And that process of just one by one gets me into this rhythm of peacefulness and gratitude. And because vegetable soup requires a lot of chopping, I love to make it.
Sarah, thanks for sharing more of yourself with us. Here's the thing, friends. We want you to be a part of the conversation. We want your burning questions. We want your curious musings and your wild wonderings about our guests. So if there's something you just always wanted to know or to ask, now is your chance. Go to our website, polishnetwork.org, and submit your questions there. Recent reports indicate that isolation, loneliness, and lack of leadership growth opportunities weigh heavily on working women today. And these are just some of the many reasons why the Polish Network is on a mission to embolden women in their faith and work. And we invite you to join us as a Polish partner. Visit polishnetwork.org/give and help us ensure a steady foundation for women to find the vital community they crave, the professional development they deserve, and the gospel they need. So, we've listened to your story. We've listened to this challenge of what can I do, and where is God calling me? What is the next right step someone could take to build meaningful connections with their communities, understanding and addressing the unique needs and challenges faced by different groups within their community? What would be a good right next step?
I think it starts with a perspective of knowing how valuable and how loved you are. Because if I don't think that I'm seen and I don't think I'm loved and I don't think that I matter, then that gives me zero confidence or courage to reflect that to anybody else. So I think that is the place to start, by seeing how loved and valuable you are. And then out of that, have a passion to help other people see how loved and how valuable they are as well. Sure. And I think when it comes to community, one of the things that I realized when I started having this relationship with the Invisible Girls is that we often think that, you know, we are Americans and we have this money and we live in this neighborhood, and then we go to this poor neighborhood and they don't have the money that we do. Sure. So we're going to like give down. And we look at what we have to contribute as going in that direction. But what I realized with the Invisible Girls is, you know, I had a community, you know, I had my church that I could mobilize for them. I had money to buy them clothes and food, but they gave back to me in such a meaningful way. They showed me hospitality. They showed me unconditional love. They showed me what it meant to be joyful in spite of enduring great suffering. And I think the other thing that we need to realize is that if we don't engage with people who are having a hard time, we are also missing out on the opportunity to learn and benefit from them. And I think that's what builds true community, is not the rich people giving to the poor people, not the people with this skill giving to the people that don't have it, but it's all of us engaging and realizing that they are wealthy in resources that we don't have, and they are wealthy in opportunities to engage with a relationship that we really need. And I think looking for that mutuality brings a lot of depth and meaning and joy and mutuality. And I think that in some way it takes the pressure off of us to, you know, we don't have to ride in on a horse and be the savior. But we can walk into a messy situation and sit with people and say, I've got this in my pocket that I can share with you, and they've got something in their pocket that they can share with you too. And I think that's where we really build true, genuine community, which is really beautiful.
Yeah, the word that comes to mind is collaboration. Absolutely. When you say that it's a collaborative effort, it's not one just giving of what they have and the other just receiving. It's a two-sided relationship. And that's the beauty of community. It's the beauty of God's kingdom. That's like what it is. We all have something to contribute, and we have resources, whether we realize it or not, to contribute. It's discovering what that is, right?
Yes.
And
you know, on that note, I think we also get locked into these mental models about what we need to have in order to help people. So when I was growing up, we had missionaries that came to our church, and missionaries that I met had, you know, one of like 5 skills, right? So there was the, you know, the pilot, there was the preacher, there was the teacher, there was the doctor, and there was the nurse. And if you had one of these skill sets, then you could, you know, go to the developing world and you can make a difference. But if you were like an engineer, a mathematician, or stay-at-home mom or whatever, it's like, I'm not one of those 5, so I don't know. But, you know, when I, in Togo one day, the pump on the river broke. So the pump brought water out of the river to the treatment plant where it got cleaned and then dispersed to the village to all of these pumps. And one day that huge pump on the river broke. And so the town had no running water for days, and people started drinking out of cisterns where the water was gross, and they got real sick from it. And I realized, you know, if an engineer who knew how to fix a pump could have been there that day, he would have saved more lives than all of us at the hospital combined. And so there is no skill set that the world doesn't need. There is no person that the world doesn't need. There is no demographic that the world doesn't need. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what you can and can't do. If you can just do one thing to help, that's enough.
I love that, Sarah. That's That's something that we truly believe in at Polish, is that we're all gifted and we're all called wherever, like, our gifts can be used, and they can be used in several different settings. No matter, it's kind of like, if God's called you to it, he's going to like show you where you can contribute. And so I think that's such an encouraging reminder for all of us. And I thank you for bringing that up, because someone's listening to this and they're realizing maybe for the first time that, maybe I can actually contribute to the mission, whatever that looks like. And it could even just be in the workplace that I'm in every single day. You could be that person, that walking light, wherever God is calling you to serve him that day,
Absolutely.
So I thank you so much for bringing that up. I thank you for sharing pieces of your story. And to kind of wrap up this conversation, what resources could you share if we want to learn more about you and your work, or resources that have helped shaped your perspective in the work that you do? Could you share some resources with us?
Sure. So the best place to find me is social media. It's just Sarah Thebarge, Instagram, Facebook, etc.
Perfect.
And then the books, so The Invisible Girls and Well, are available wherever books are sold. So picking up a copy of that. There's also an audiobook. I recorded the audiobooks for these. So I tell my friends, if you want to hear me reading you a bedtime story by the audiobook, I'll read it to you. Don't worry. So that's available. When Helping Hurts, I think, is a really good book to pick up and read, because that explains how, when we think about helping the world incorrectly, or we use models that are now outdated, it actually can do more harm than good. And so When Helping Hurts is really insightful in terms of, if we do want to make a contribution to a community, here's how to do it well in a way that's empowering and sustainable.
You have a website too, correct?
Yeah, it's sarahthebarge.com. So first and
Perfect.com. All right. Well, we will be sure to link to all that. Again, Sarah, thank you so much for showing up today and sharing your story with us, and just encouraging us with some challenging things to wrestle with as far as what it means to really show up for others as we lead with love. Thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure, Jane. Thanks for having me.
Today's conversation with Sarah has challenged me to consider the resources God has given me and how it can be used to contribute to make this world a better place. How about you? What's your key takeaway from today's conversation? Here are 5 of mine. Showing up for others starts with understanding how loved and valuable you are. Engaging in others' pain propels us to love others. What question are you asking? If I stop and help him or her, what will happen to me? Or if I don't stop and help him or her, what will happen to them? True community is built from all of us engaging mutually with each other. All skills are welcome and needed in God's kingdom. There is no skill set that the world does not need. And if you can do just one thing to help, that's enough. Let's compare notes. I want to know what your key takeaways are from our conversation today. You can share those on our Instagram post for this episode, and let me know what is resonating with you. As we draw near to the end of this episode, I want to extend our deepest appreciation to those who make the Polish Podcast possible. The Polish Podcast is supported in part by a grant from Coca-Cola Consolidated. Special thanks to Sarah Thebarge for sharing her passion with us and pursuing and loving the least of these well. Be sure to check out her books that are linked in today's show notes, and be sure to check out her website too. To our listeners, thank you for your unwavering support. Your engagement and feedback drive us to create content that resonates with you. A heartfelt thank you to the Polish Network for cultivating a community where working women can thrive and connect. And I want to give a thank you and big shout out to my church, White Oak Christian Church, for your partnership and generosity in the production process of these episodes. And as we continue to learn what it means to lead well and show up for others, remember,
it's love that causes us to be in the moment and to look around us and to do the very best next thing that we can do to alleviate suffering.
Be sure to stay connected with us on social media and our YouTube channel. You do not want to forget to like and subscribe. And if you could, please rate and review the Polished Podcast as well. But until next time, this is Jane Doerman signing off. Keep moving forward and remain emboldened.